WellPod at DC on Riot Radio.
From meditation, stress management, safer substance use, and sexual health, we will literally talk sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Join us to dive deep into some student health questions. We'll learn about wellness together, try some coping tools, and meet some interesting people.
Your co-hosts, Heather and Craig.
Perfect blend of Campus Health and Wellness Center and Sal's.
Each week, we'll DIY a wellness tool together.
And then nerd out and dig into the science behind how it works.
Email your health and wellness related questions to wellpod@durhamcollege.ca to be discussed anonymously on air. Welcome to the WellPod at DC.
Welcome to the WellPod at DC, live from the Media Hub here on riotradio.ca. So our student question of the week is, how can I improve my body image, struggling with the pressures to be thin? So today we're talking about eating disorders and body image, hunger, hormones, and intuitive eating, ending with some tips to feed our academic success. So February 1st to 7th each year is Eating Disorders Awareness Week. And in Canada, there's an estimated prevalence rate of diagnosed eating disorders between 2 and 3% in the general population, but 1/3 of Canadians report thoughts and behaviors that are consistent with disordered eating. Between 2020 and 2022, there was a 126% increase in emergency room presentations and 60% increase in inpatient hospitalizations for eating disorders in Canada. Statistics show that post-secondary students, like those here at Durham College, are one of the at-risk groups. Student Wellness at the University of Guelph reports 1 in every 13 undergraduate students has an eating disorder. So today we are welcoming back Michelle Pittman, eating disorder psychotherapist from the Campus Health and Wellness Center. Welcome back, Michelle.
Thank you.
So Michelle, tell us a little bit about this year's theme for Eating Disorder Awareness Week, Embracing Possibilities. What does this mean?
Yeah, so I think the challenge with eating disorders treatments over the years has been they're not accessible and equitable. That's often kind of the criticisms that programs get, that there's a certain narrative about who gets an eating disorder, what they look like, so the idea is to kind of, with Embracing Possibilities, that theme for EDA this year, it's about bringing in community voices in changing that landscape and making services equitable and accessible for all.
I hear you talking kind of about almost this idea of barriers, like accessing care and accessing support. What are some misconceptions around eating disorders that you were just kind of hinting at that could maybe hinder students from accessing support?
Yeah. Well, oftentimes when people hear the word eating disorder, first of all, they have a certain kind of perception of what that is. So oftentimes, and this is influenced by kind of media messaging that we've had over the years. You know, if I think back to my time as an adolescent, and this is really dating myself, but Karen Carpenter, she was this famous musician from like the 70s and 80s, and her struggle with anorexia was very kind of became well known because she died from complications from anorexia. And so, you know, while it was important to hear her message and kind of give voice to that experience, messaging like that or stories like that are often promoted, right? And so people tend to think, oh, well, people who have eating disorders are emaciated, right? They're restricting their eating. But disordered eating can kind of run across a continuum, and it can happen for folks across all weights, shapes, and sizes.
One of the resources I know that you mention often is NEDIC. And so they have a helpline and a live chat for those that maybe are looking for some support. So they operate Canada's only national toll-free helpline, Monday through Thursday, 9 to 9, and Fridays 9 to 5, Sundays 12 to 5 as well. And so you can call toll-free 1-866-633-4220. That's 1-866-633-4220. 4220 or nedic, nedic.ca, and they have some great supports there. Can you tell us a little bit about one of the supports you offer through the Campus Health and Wellness Center? What's one meal at a time? I think we have a graphic to help us as well.
Yeah, so One Meal at a Time is a meal support program that we established here last school year, and so continuing that program. We're actually starting up again next Tuesday, and it's a virtual program where we meet on camera from 11:30 to 1 every other Tuesday. And we use that time to first try to challenge potential like disordered eating kind of thoughts and behaviors by sharing a meal together in a space that is judgment-free. There's no pressure. Of course, if you're feeling like you just can't do it today, we're not gonna, we're not going to leave you behind or tell you that you can't stay in group. You do what is best for you in terms of challenging, again, some of those disordered eating thoughts that might be coming up. And it's about changing our relationship with food and our bodies. And so once the meal is done, that's like the first 30 minutes, then we do a little bit of a check-in and then group discussion on topics such as practicing from a harm reduction approach with our eating, learning to practice self-compassion as well with our eating and any body image concerns. And then we also have some topics around body image as well, and trying to get to a place where we can have like a positive body image.
Yes. I think a misconception often that I know I once hold, and I sometimes hear others, is this idea that eating disorders or dysregulated eating is about just the food. But I hear you talking about body image. Can you tell us a little bit more about this concept of body image and how this kind of weaves into our eating?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a lot of, we could talk about diet culture for one, right? So diet culture tells us that certain bodies are quote unquote good, thin bodies, and fat bodies are quote unquote bad or unhealthy. And so that can really kind of play into our body image, and in wanting to achieve the thin ideal, right? Well, that'll influence our eating as well.
Yeah.
So maybe I should talk a little bit about what body image our body image is.
And I think we have a graphic that can kind of support this for our viewers as well. So what is body image?
Yeah, so you can think of body image as how you kind of see yourself, you perceive your body, how you feel about your body, the thoughts that come up, and then the behavior that you engage in around how you see, feel, and think about your body. It's a complex construct that is shaped by those sociocultural messages we get about what bodies should look like, and how they should be in the world and show up in the world. Those influences can come from our earliest childhood experiences in the family, outside of the home, of course within media, social media being a big one nowadays, with how our body image is influenced by that. And teachers and coaches are just some examples of how our body image is influenced by those interactions.
Sometimes there might be, you kind of have mentioned these messages that we get from society, sometimes referenced as social cultural kind of messages. How do some of these messages start to kind of play a role in our body image?
Yeah, so I think, again, social media is such a big one nowadays, and the images that we see of people are very curated, right? And so oftentimes it's, makeup might look a certain way, right? We might kind of erase any kind of flaws that we have, and the positioning of someone's body, right? It's all kind of in that vein of trying to present a particular image or look. And I'd say the biggest contributor or the biggest kind of sociocultural message tends to be around size, weight, and shape, right? So fat phobia is pervasive, and it's embedded in many things that we see, and almost to the point of it being kind of subconscious, right? We're not even necessarily aware of it.
That term weight stigma kind of comes up, and I think we have a graphic here as well. So how does this tie in? What's the idea around weight stigma?
So weight stigma is like the experiences of people in larger bodies. So again, we might have certain biases, anti-fat bias, right? We might even internalize that messaging. And so again, it can be so innocuous and so ingrained in our society that, for example, weight-based bullying in schools, it's like the leading type of bullying that happens within schools. So we might experience that at a very young age. Being kind of mocked or made fun of, certain kind of name calling, it might show up, right? There might be physical harm that comes our way, being assaulted. And then, you can think of it as well, like in terms of structural barriers. So there's this video about fat people's experiences on planes, right? And how the video itself, it's a really, an animated video that's really interesting, where it actually brings in the voices of people with lived experiences of going onto a plane and being, again, verbally assaulted, being looked at in a very kind of demeaning way. And so, it's not as easy or enjoyable experience for a fat person just to board a plane.
You also have spoken in the past about kind of living in a culture of anti-fat biases. Tell us a little bit more about this bias.
So again, it's kind of related to some of those like structural barriers that we talked about. And just those everyday kind of messages, some that are kind of indirect, such as a certain kind of look or kind of move of the body, like away from, a fat person. It can be certain kind of tropes that are out there in terms of, for example, there's studies out there that have shown that higher weight people in the workplace experience discrimination, that there's this underlying belief that they're lazy and unmotivated, and that can have real world kind of implications, right, to their socioeconomic status.
And I think we have a graphic that kind of talks about these impacts that you're talking about, kind of these consequences. They can actually start to turn more internalized. So that kind of day in, day out experience of anti-fat bias, again, whether it begins in school, in the home, experiencing in the healthcare system too. For example, being told, let's say somebody goes in and they're having some issues with their knee. And they're looking to get like knee surgery, and the comment might be, well, come back when you lose X number of pounds, right? And so, they're left with some maybe potentially debilitating pain and having to kind of suffer needlessly, right? And so, when people continue to experience that anti-fat bias, again, day in and day out, that's a stressor, just like any other form of discrimination or oppression, right? It weighs on a person, right? And so that increases the stress response, right? Increased cortisol. And then, again, internalizing that messaging further increases that stress response. And oftentimes people will think, and understandably so, the only way out of this is dieting. I got to diet in order to I have to become thin so that I'm not subjected to this day in and day out, right? And then the challenge with that, though, is what we call weight cycling. So, diets don't last for the majority of people. Studies have shown anywhere between 80 to 95% of dieters will regain the weight within 5 years, and even sometimes more. So with every diet,
when you're, again, that's another stressor on the body. You lose weight, then you gain it, you lose weight, and then maybe you gain some more. And that can be really harmful for us as well.
Talking about these pressures that can get us into these unhealthy loops. You've had some experiences in kind of the judo world. What were some of the messages you heard in that landscape?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I was a competitive athlete in judo, and judo is a weight-based martial arts sport. And so being in a certain weight category, I was told by, well-meaning coaches that I needed to lose weight to get into this particular weight category, right? We think you have more of a shot in, going to a higher level by going into a smaller weight category. And that set up a pretty tricky relationship with food for me.
Absolutely. I would imagine there's lots of professions, lots of hobbies that might have this element where you might feel these pressures in order to succeed and have achievements in your sport, in your hobby, how much of that then starts to get tied to your eating habits, to your body image habits.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a couple of resources that I know we have talked about in the past as well, and that you've shared with me. What are some books or some resources that may be some really good starting points to engage in this conversation further?
Yeah. So one that I read last year was Aubrey Gordon's What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat. And she talks about, again, from a lived experience, but also pulls in some of the research around some of those everyday experiences of weight discrimination, weight stigma that people experience, and and just how painful that can be. And then another resource that I think I may have shared on a previous podcast is Fearing the Black Body. And so Sabrina Strings, she's a researcher academic, and she talks about the racial origins of fat phobia, how that is interconnected with racism.
What are some ways we can shift towards a more positive body image?
Yeah, so we can, first of all, recognize some of those kind of body image thoughts, like when we're having like a negative experience, like we're having negative kind of thoughts and feelings about our bodies, right? And recognize where that's coming from. So just building some awareness around your relationship to your body. Social media, it's not going away, and it is a big kind of part of our lives nowadays, but maybe developing a little bit more of some critical kind of literacy around engaging in social media content. Yeah, and so this video that I'm going to be showing in our One Meal at a Time group when we're talking about body image is, kind of making, poking fun at the curated image, and then just how silly it can look, right? And just how much time and effort kind of goes into some of that social media messaging around body image, right? Another thing too is being more mindful in general about what you're consuming, right? And maybe even curating your social media feed kind of for good, right? So finding some of those, folks that demonstrate a love, appreciation, respect for their bodies, right? As a way of kind of motivating you or encouraging you to kind of embrace that and shift your relationship again with your body. Divest from diet culture and fat phobia, right? That really kind of examine your internalized fat phobia. We all have it, just like we do with other kind of biases, right? That are just deeply ingrained. So it's not about feeling guilty about having it. It's about, again, just kind of drawing some awareness to it and doing your best to kind of to work to like eliminate it or at least reduce it. Practicing self-compassion, that is my go-to for any time that I'm feeling kind of struggle or having some difficulty, but particularly around the body, that can be helpful. And then one resource that I've been kind of introducing to some of the folks that I work with one-on-one is the Positive Body Image Workbook. They have a number of kind of CBT-oriented activities. There's a lot of different assessments, again, that kind of pulls in some of that complexity around body image, but it can really help you to kind of delve into that work.
Love that. After this break, we'll continue to talk about this topic, but looking more at our hunger hormones and intuitive eating. Back here on riotradio.ca. Welcome back to the WellPod at DC, live from the Media Hub here on riotradio.ca. So this season, our second half of season 3, we've been diving a little bit deeper into the hormones that control the functions of our body. And so we're seeing if we can almost kind of biohack using education on these hormones to really help align us on a healthier path. And so let's explore a little bit about hunger hormones. So ghrelin, I'm probably not saying that too correctly, but Craig, alas, is not here today to correct me. But we're going to talk about ghrelin and leptin. So leptin is a hormone made by fat cells that decreases our appetite. So it helps to signal the brain, I've had enough, you have enough energy storage. So think of it as kind of the fullness messenger. It tells your brain to stop eating, so leptin means break for appetite. Research has found a link with obesity to a resistance in the appetite suppressing effects of leptin, meaning some of us genetically are resistant to the effect of leptin, so our appetite never decreases. We never have the sensation of fullness. Have you ever heard about this in some of the work that you do? People kind of talking about not noticing that sensation of feeling full?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. Then the other hormone that's often talked about, before we jump forward, so leptin, appetite suppressor, appears to be the bigger player in our body's energy balancer. And some researchers feel that it might be influencing how our ghrelin regulates. So ghrelin, often called the hunger hormone itself, is a multifaceted gut hormone which activates the growth hormone, and I'm not going to pronounce this, so Craig, if you're watching at home, have a chuckle, secretagogue? How would you, Michelle, you give a little tongue twister guess there. What do you think?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that a good one?
Pretty close.
We'll just call it a growth hormone of sorts. So this has a stimulating effect. So it increases our food intake, our fat disposition, and our growth hormone release. So it increases appetite. It's the gas pedal for appetite. It's released primarily in our stomach, secreted when our stomach is a little bit empty. It enters our bloodstream and affects different parts of our brain, like our hypothalamus, with a hunger signal. So the other one said, hey, you're full, slow down, stop eating. This hormone really signals more energy, more food, you're still hungry. So it really helps to activate us to seek out food. Evolutionary biology really looks at this being a survival hormone. It really helped signal to us to continue to seek out getting the food that we needed in order to survive. Typically, it tends to dramatically increase before we're eating and then go down for about 3 hours afterwards. And what we notice is when we undereat, it actually will really start to increase. And so if we're dieting and restricting, it's actually going to send more of this signal trying to get more energy in. When we are overeating, if our hormones are in balance and genetically everything is functioning, this hormone should start decreasing to decrease that sensation of how hungry we are. These hunger hormones, though, as we've been talking over these last few weeks, they work in harmony with all of the other functions and other hormones in our body. So things like our sleep-wake cycle, our reward-seeking behavior, our taste sensation, our metabolism. So arch enemy disruptor of our hunger hormones is one of our stress hormones that we like to talk a lot about around here is our cortisol. So cortisol reduces our appetite and then increases it. So let's use a dinosaur as an example. We can't eat when we're running away from a T-Rex, so our appetite is going to be suppressed. But after, we just spent a lot of times booking away from those jaws, so we're going to be really hungry. So part of cortisol's role is to get you to replace that energy that you just released, because when we're stressed out, it's a lot of energy. You might notice after a stressful test, stressful exam, new social interaction, a hot date that you have coming up, we feel the sensation of stress. We might notice an impact to our appetite. So on the screen, you're going to notice a graphic here. So A is when we have no stress, so we're eating some food, and those different hormones secreted in our stomach and in our fat cells, it's going to signal to keep eating, that ghrelin hunger hormone, more food, and then the leptin is going to send those signals to our hypothalamus to slow down, I'm feeling full, we're all good. But with stress, that T-Rex enters the picture. Cortisol is released and sent to our stomach and our fat cells, and what is happening here is that with the chronic stress, it can stimulate that ghrelin still. So we're still going to notice that increased appetite, that hunger, but it's going to reduce the sensitivity of the hypothalamus to the leptin. So we don't feel full. So how you might see this play out when you're really stressed is you might notice after a really stressful event, you notice sometimes that you're feeling a little bit more hungry or you're just overall not feeling satisfied. How I typically hear this in students will say to me, oh, I've been feeling so stressed out lately, I just don't feel hungry. And so they are really not noticing those hunger cues when they hit. Then because of this, perhaps this kind of dulling of that leptin signals to our brain, we're never really feeling that sensation of feeling full. So we just don't feel like eating quite often. Mm-hmm. Cortisol can also interfere with other hormones and change how rewarding and yummy we find food. So what we're seeing in research is cortisol will actually make us feel kind of less good about eating. And so a shepherd's pie or something that once really satisfied us, we're not feeling as satisfied, and it actually changes the taste of food. So we're noticing perhaps just the sensation of eating while we're stressed out is not feeling very good. So our goal is to work with our hunger hormones. Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about why bringing awareness to these hunger cues, to these hormones, is important for us?
Yeah, well, one thing off the top, as you're describing that kind of ghrelin, leptin, like the roles that they play, it made me think of what I often talk about with folks, which is learning to listen to those hunger and fullness cues, right? And when we don't, so first of all, as you were describing, when we aren't listening to our hunger signals, or if because of stress, for example, maybe we're just not kind of in tune to them in the same way, we do risk what we call the restrict binge cycle, right? So if we are delaying our eating, right, if we're going longer than like 3-4 hours without food or without enough food, that's another important kind of distinction, then we're risking a binge happening at some point. We might be able to stave off that binge for the rest of the day, but in the next day or two, it's going to come back to bite us in the butt.
Yeah. I notice at nighttime, once the world kind of has settled, it's like, oh, perhaps because my day has been so busy, I hear from students they're busy in classes and studying. Nighttime, it quiets down, and then it's almost like we get this reminder of, hey, I'm actually hungry right now.
Yeah.
But now it's much more of this kind of binge kind of behavior that we notice later at night.
Yeah. So typically, again, what the research has shown in terms of like disordered eating is the primary reason that binges tend to happen is restricted eating.
Yeah.
And if we can get a kind of a hold of that, if we can start to regulate our eating, make sure that we're honoring those hunger and fullness cues, we're eating adequately, consistently, and enough, that the binges will, if not reduce entirely, they'll come down significantly. And if we find that our eating is regulated and we're still binging, and what I mean by binging is like an objective binge, right? Sometimes people will think of binging as, oh, like I had a bag of chips. Like, I had a family-sized bag of chips. That doesn't necessarily constitute a binge, right? However, if we find that we've addressed the restricted eating and that objective binging is still happening, then it might be emotional vulnerability, right? And a way of attempting to kind of regulate our emotions that is the reason behind the binging.
Let's explore some more tips after this break. We'll explore some different ways to feed our academics to success back here on riotradio.ca. Welcome back to the WellPod at DC, live from the Media Hub here on riotradio.ca. So the human brain takes up approximately 20% of the body's total energy, and some research is discovering we might use a little bit more energy, more calories when we're learning. So as a student, when we're dumping in all sorts of new information, whether it's a first day in class, meeting new friends, first day in the job, especially new information, might take a little bit more energy from our bodies. And so calories equal energy, potentially can equal some learning power. So it often ties to this idea that food is fuel. And for many of us, that might be kind of a healthy mindset. For some of us, though, it can start to maybe have some restrictive ideas around it, because food is so much more than just fuel for our body. It's a form of connection woven to memories and celebrations. So there's many reasons why we eat. But Michelle, from a place of kind of compassion and intuitive eating, what are some ways we can feed for academic success?
Yeah, so recognizing, I mean, I'm a recent mature student myself, graduated, and being a student is stressful. And I can understand the pull to like spend an extra half hour on that assignment instead of getting up because it might be time to eat. And we can kind of find some strategies to make sure that we're eating even in the midst of, having a stressful kind of hectic schedule. And or if we're not feeling well and, that's affecting our appetite. So I like to suggest focusing on the 4 Ps and creating what we call our Nourishment 911 plan. So kind of planning ahead for those times when you might be busy, or again, if you're not feeling well and that's going to affect your appetite, we still have to eat anyways, right? The brain doesn't kind of distinguish between, being kind of stressed or sick, and, it still needs food, right? Your body and your brain still need food. So the 4 Ps are, identifying some of the things that are easy to prepare, right? That aren't going to take a lot of effort, right? That are also affordable to purchase. So also recognizing that as a student, right, financial resources might be limited. So making sure that you're kind of taking that into account as well. Don't break the bank, and kind of create more stress for yourself. So easy to prepare, affordable to purchase, and that have staying power. And what I mean by that is it's going to give you some sustenance to get through to that next eating experience. Remember, we shouldn't be going longer than 4 hours without eating. So yeah, identifying some of those things that are going to kind of last for you. So easy to prepare, affordable to purchase, have staying power, and the last one is satisfying to your palate. So that's the other thing too that is really, really important. So make sure that the foods that you're kind of choosing in this Nutrition 911 plan are also going to be things that you enjoy. That kind of create that balance, right? And so, when you create that, just making sure that all of those things are available to you. And I would maybe even add another one, that it's kind of like easy to grab and go too. Right? I often hear like students are, rushing to catch the bus to get to school, then to work, right? They're always on the go. And so making sure that the things that you have in that 911 nourishment kit are some things that you can kind of pack with you.
Kind of the 5th P there, pack.
There
easy
you
to
go.
pack. So we have prepare, a purchase, power, palette, and pack. Many of these speak living in a neurodivergent world, myself, and working and supporting with a lot of students that also live with neurodivergence. These tips and ideas really resonate with many individuals. And so, not just kind of average students, but students that might have some executive functioning challenges. I often hear from students even just the idea that I'm forgetting to eat. It's not that I'm trying to engage in these restrictive behaviors, but I'm just kind of, for my executive functioning skills, I'm forgetting to make sure I'm honoring those kind of ideas of eating every few hours. So there's some other ways we can also support our hunger hormones that are very much in line with this kind of Nourishment 911. One of the things that we see overall for all of our hormones is the importance of staying hydrated. And so making sure we are getting enough of our fluid intakes, eating protein, healthy carbs, fibers. These are all foods that can be really healthy in regulating those hunger hormones. But two that are actually have almost, it seems like, less to do with food in a sense, but are really vital and tend to be some of the most effective is stress management. So thinking about that T-Rex, really thinking about how you regulate your stress, how you take care of yourself with stress management, and sleep. Last week we talked about sleep. In a few weeks we'll continue the conversation about how we can really engage in a healthy sleep routine. But boy, does our sleep habits really play a role on how those hunger hormones will be activated and how they will have impact. The other that we often come across is prioritizing breakfast. There's a lot of kind of debate, for a better word, of like which diet is best. We hear about the carnivore diet and fasting, and really what research is showing us is each body is so genetically different. And so this is why leaning more into intuitive eating, seeing what works for you, thinking about your own palate, thinking about what flavors you like, and seeing how your body responds to different periods of fasting is really important for us to lean into. However, they are seeing in research starting your day, really thinking about how you start your day with nourishment. So you might be doing a little bit of a fast in the mornings, but really making sure you're starting off that cycle with some healthy foods. And as you mentioned, 3 to 4 hours, right? 3 to 5 hours is what a lot of research is saying, not kind of restricting or fasting for long periods throughout the day. Has been shown to really help regulate some of those hunger hormones. I've heard you use a term before about kind of mechanical eating. Can you tell us just a little bit about what that concept is?
Yeah, so this is a concept that is often used as like a first kind of intervention with folks with eating disorders, but it can also be used by folks that maybe have been kind of ignoring their hunger and fullness cues and maybe aren't totally confident or certain, about those signals. So mechanical eating is like an interim kind of step to intuitive eating when our signals were not totally in tune to them. And basically, I like to say it's a fancy way of saying eating because it's time to. Okay. So it speaks to, eating, sometimes even every 2 to 4 hours. Oftentimes I'll say to folks, try and have like your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, let's say 5 to 6 hours apart, and then have a snack halfway in between there. So you should be having 3 meals, 2 to 3 snacks a day as part of mechanical eating. And then the biggest piece to that is eating because it's time to eat. And even if you don't quote unquote feel hungry, still eating anyways.
Getting that nourishment taken care of.
And getting your body used to, okay, I can trust, I can relax, right? I can trust that I'm going to get fed now when I need to.
Other ideas around kind of making sure our hormones are being regulated has to do with this intuitive eating that we've been talking a lot about today. And in some past episodes, Michelle, you've joined us and explored intuitive eating. So this idea of paying attention to your hunger cues, discovering the satisfaction factor. So kind of embracing the sense of being satisfied by your food. And we talked about how there's a hormone that kind of gives us that full feeling. Can you tell us a little bit more about satisfaction factor?
Satisfaction is so important because let me think of an example. If, let's say, I want like chips and dip. I'm a fan of chips and dip. But I think, chips and dip are bad for me. Or I don't know if I can trust myself to stop eating the chips and dip. So maybe I'll have rice cakes instead, because rice cakes are healthier, less calories, right?
Yes.
But what happens is if I have the rice cakes when I really wanted the chips and dip, right? At the end, it's just not going to be fun, right?
No.
And you're probably still going to be preoccupied with the chips and dip.
I want those dip,
right? So you still might end up gravitating to the chips and dip. So yes, satisfaction is really important, and I think it also ties in with taking the kind of moral weight out of food choices, right? So giving yourself permission to have the chips and dip. I think we've talked about this before too. To have the chocolate, right? And over time, if we, again, give ourselves that permission, we'll find a place where we're able to trust ourselves around those foods that maybe we previously deemed bad for us.
Yeah, this whole idea of trust kind of links with the last intuitive eating principle that can really help our hormones stay regulated, and this idea around, honoring our body by providing its basic needs, a sense of nourishment. It's an ultimate act of self-love by being able to nourish ourselves and respect our bodies that way and give love to our body image, which we talked about earlier today.
Yeah, and it's reciprocal. When we have a positive body image, and again, research has shown this, that people that have positive body image tend to practice intuitive eating, tend to engage in kind of regular, kind of joyful movement, right? That their well-being, their overall kind of holistic well-being is more improved. So it's a reciprocal kind of process.
Well, this is the end of our episode today. Some of the resources that mentioned, as well as perhaps some additional extras, will be on the Campus Health and Wellness Center's Instagram at wellness@DC. Don't forget, you can email questions to be discussed anonymously on air, wellpod@durhamcollege.ca. Next week is Sexual Health Awareness Week, so join us for a sexy episode talking about oxytocin. Don't forget, you can follow the DCSA Media Hub on social media at DCSA Media Hub. Thanks for exploring what it means to be well with me and Michelle today instead of Craig. And we'll see you next time at the WellPod at DC live on the Media Hub, from the Media Hub on riotradio.ca.